All right, so up next is going to be question and answer time, and I have sheets of questions about things that I have heard other people ask, things are on the news. Dr. Cabanas, I want to start with you. For Wake County employees, will this vaccine be mandatory?
No, at this time, there's no specific policy that mandates that every employee needs to get a vaccine. And the reason we're doing it that way is, number one, this is under the EUA approval, so this process is still sort of evolving. And number two, I think the biggest value is to make sure that we're providing everybody with all the information and education necessary so people can make a personal choice. So at this time, there's no guidance or direction to make this mandatory. Our efforts are not going about that. Our efforts are about making sure that we're giving you all the education and the information you need to make sure you can make a personal choice of a vaccination. And from my point of view, I am going to get the vaccine as soon as possible. I'll be the first one online as soon as whatever is available. It is in my view, is the right thing to do as a clinician, protect my family, protect my patients, and protect my community.
And for those who get the vaccine, whether or not they're a Wake County employee or not, is there a cost to getting the vaccine?
No, there's no cost for the vaccine as part of the Operation Warp Speed development and all the efforts that you're seeing in coordination between federal, state, and local. The goal, the primary purpose is to make this available as broadly as possible across the country, so we can actually, have a dent in that curve for the pandemic.
And this can be for anybody. We talked about the fact that children were not in the test group, neither were pregnant women. So if we have a female who is nursing or currently pregnant or trying to get pregnant, should they get the vaccine?
Based on the current evidence, that has not been evaluated, right? So I think Jeff put it exactly right. It's not a contraindication, it's an unknown, right? We have not tested in that population. Now, is there any reason to think there's a problem? No, but it's not been tested. So, that'll be between you and your OBGYN, I would think. I mean, the EUA is like anything else. Once it's in the wild, you can kind of do what you want, but I would certainly not recommend it as a general course.
Right.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say I agree with that. I think that there's no reason to believe that it's not efficacious or dangerous in any of those populations. Again, if I could drag my children down to the pediatrician and get them vaccinated with the same shot that I'm getting vaccinated with, I would absolutely 100% do that. But, from a ethics and science standpoint, the reality is that if we're saying, transparency and the importance of this process on one side and then subverting the process on the other, those two things don't really jive. So I think because those groups are not in the EUA, unfortunately, we're going to have to wait for more information and more data before we can recommend it.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that 100%. I would say that I would recommend, obviously, for anybody who, children, patients, are pregnant, I think a conversation with a primary care physician or OBGYN physician, it's actually highly recommended because, like Brent and Jeff stated, they haven't been studied, so we really just don't know. But we have a very low suspicion that has any major side effects or anything like that. So I will vaccinate my children, but I would recommend that everybody sort of have that conversation with their own primary care provider for those populations.
Similarly, if I've already had COVID-19, I've had a positive test, do I still need to get the vaccine?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
For the reasons in that study, right? There's 10 to 15% of people that don't mount on a response, and it's hard to know without a whole host of very in-depth testing whether you were in that group or not. So it's easier just to get the vaccine.
Yes.
So the vaccine itself, one of the endpoints of the study, the vaccine's not designed to kill the virus. Is that correct? Okay. So if it's not designed to kill the virus, and I'm relatively healthy, right? I don't have any of the comorbidities that put me in the high risk group. And I know I'm still going to have wear a mask after I get the vaccine. And we're not sure how long, the vaccine will last. Do I still need to get it?
Yeah, and I want to just go back to what you said originally in terms of kill the virus. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by kill it. So the vaccine is designed to identify the protein on the outside of COVID, and then get rid of it, right? Get it out of your body. You can say kill it, you can say remove it, you can say whatever you want, but your body's you at that point have antibodies floating around your body in your bloodstream that would recognize a COVID virus particle when it came into your body and get rid of that, right? Break it down, remove it, get it out of there. So you can say kill it, you can say remove it, but yes, absolutely, the vaccine makes antibodies against the COVID virus. So the vaccine itself doesn't kill COVID, but right. The results of the vaccine is that your body is able to kill COVID, right?
Yes. So
I think that's an important distinction, because the back end of the answer to the question is, even though we're pretty far into this pandemic, and 2020 feels like a really long year to everybody, there's still a lot about this virus that we don't know. It does have a very high death rate, despite what you may have heard or read. And we also don't know exactly how it affects certain individuals, right? So some young, healthy people get COVID and die, right? That's a true fact. Some older, sicker people, probably more older and sicker people, fortunately or unfortunately, get COVID and die. But people have bad outcomes and long-term hospitalizations and morbidity and mortality from COVID. And it's hard to predict who those people will be. And those people who get COVID and have either significant symptomatic illness or, long-term hospitalization, ICU, or even death, those folks are occurring in the population at a higher rate than for other viruses that we know a lot about. And so, yes, I think it's important to be able to sort of trust your own body's immune system to battle various and sundry viruses and bacteria. But there is no reason why we shouldn't be looking for the extra boost that the COVID vaccine gives us to create antibodies, so that those antibodies can then, kill the virus when they see it, as opposed to starting fresh, right? It's like running a marathon, but instead of starting at the starting line, you get to start halfway through, right? Why would you not give your body a chance to start halfway through when it's battling something like COVID?
And I want to give it a different view, which is, yes, that's all that is. I agree 100%. That has to do with the individual. For us as a nation to get out of this thing, 70% of the population at a minimum has to have immunity. It may be higher than that, but it's absolutely 70%. And, there are states, and it's fine to name them because it's a public thing, New York, Colorado, and soon Alaska, that are considering removing EMS from phase 1A.
Yeah.
Right now in North Carolina, we are very fortunate that our leaders understand how important it is to leave EMS in 1A. So I think the reason they're doing that is, of course, because they care about the health of the individual, but it's also because from a public health perspective, we need the EMS and frontline health workers healthy and available between now and April. And so I think there's an individual piece that you talked about, but there's also this larger community calling, if you will, that says, we know this thing's safe. I mean, look at the side effect profile is pretty benign. I mean, all things considered. And we know we need to get to 70%. There's only one way to get there.
And I would add one thing, Don, real quick to add is, and if you, and I'll let also Brent add here, but also consider the strategy of, on the first phase of the vaccination rollout process of first addressing the vulnerable populations and frontline workers and folks in the front lines translates into more lives saved, right? because that's the high risk population, and by you vaccinating and doing that first, when you look at some of the models out there, there's actually more lives saved over time from a population level standpoint.
Yeah. A slow rollout saves about 25,000 lives, according to the University of Washington, between now and April the 1st. A rapid rollout, including the populations Jose just talked about, saves between 44 and 49,000 lives. And that's just at April the 1st. The tipping point is really, as we saw on the graph, after April the 1st, there's a tremendous drop off if we have a rapid rollout. If not, we're still messing with this thing in May and June. And, I think we all want to be together for the 4th of July. And there is an absolute way that could happen if we stay on course with a rapid rollout.
The CDC, Dr. Fauci, is pretty public. They've all said they need about 70-80% of the people vaccinated, as you mentioned, Dr. Myers. Is there any other way to get to quote unquote herd immunity without this vaccine? Because we hear that term a lot as well.
Not without a bunch of people who are dead.
That's right. If you go to the University of Washington model, the last run to get there is about 250,000 more deaths at a minimum. So you can get there in one of two ways. You can open the gates and let's all go run in the street like an old chickenpox party, if that's what we want to do, and kill 250,000 people extra. So it'd be 800,000 plus, at the end of this thing, or we can all go get a vaccine.
And right now, as of this morning, I believe we're at 300,000 deaths already, or we're pretty much in that number. So just to give that context, how many more deaths you have to, suffer to be able to achieve that level?
So I want to touch on the safety aspect of this. I think one of these companies took money from the government. I think Moderna did. I think Pfizer self-funded their vaccine program. Obviously, that means they have a lot of money tied up into it, which means they need this to be successful. Does that give any of you pause in the fact that one took money from the government and one didn't, and there could be the possibility of quote unquote fudging the books or the numbers?
No.
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? So, and I'm not going to go too far into this but this is one of the things that we talk about, right? When we do journal clubs at Callback, or when we talk about how to evaluate research in the academy, we talk about evaluating the nuts and bolts of the study, right? And who wrote it, and how old is it, and all those things. And one of those things that we talk about is who funded this study, right? Yes, that is a important piece of information to know when you evaluate science and research. That said, medicine broadly, and certainly emergency medicine and certainly vaccine science, would not be nearly where it is today if you didn't have funding from the government, funding from big pharma, funding from drug companies, right? That's how science is made, frankly, is by having the money to do it that comes from all these different places. So I think it is perfectly reasonable that the funding either comes from the government or comes from big pharma. And yes, do they have an incentive to make it work? Of course they do, or they wouldn't have tried in the first place. The other piece to say about that is that, and you can evaluate this just by looking at both the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. The technology, as we've already said, is very, very similar, right? The differences in the two vaccines are probably some proprietary, how do we stabilize the liposome at, -8 bajillion degrees versus -2 bajillion degrees, right? The technology is very, very similar. And we see that the results to this point are very, very similar, right? With two separate funding sources, right? One being the government, one being private industry. So to me, the science of evaluating these different vaccines, and especially as we see more about Moderna, we see more about AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, will tell us that the data are legit, right? Even comparing the vaccine results across companies, right? So comparing them internally, as well as understanding how science funding works in general, none of that gives me pause in terms of whether to believe the results or not.
And I would add to that that Jeff's comments, which I agree 100%. So the funding piece to me, and it's a reflection of companies that may need more resources than another one to be able to respond to the calling from the government about we need a vaccine and we need it by tomorrow, right? And this is an unprecedented response from scientific space and pharma and all these companies to a very unique moment in time for the world and the country. So the what gives me a lot of reassurance is that whatever mechanism we got the resources to develop and evolve the science, we've known already established technology, is the fact that all these studies have to be vetted through a established process that has been there for many decades to vet this kind of new pharmaceuticals, new vaccines. So they were developed, but they had to be vetted through the FDA EUA process, which actually makes me feel very reassured that third party experts are looking at the data, and we're not just taking it for granted that somebody said it's okay to go.
Just Don, to put this in that historical context as well, I'll get you this article, but there's a great description of the day that both companies decided to sign on, right? And Pfizer, in the true libertarian sense, said, I do not want the government interfering with the steps of my process. I don't want the money. I want to do this myself. Moderna had 800 worldwide employees the day they got $2 billion from the federal government. And as a little startup said, by God, we're smart enough and we're going to do this thing. And giant Pfizer and little bitty Moderna came to the exact same conclusion within a week of each other. Tells me that the data are pretty good.
So we know that one of these has to be kept super, super cold. From a safety standpoint, does that add any increased risk? Are we confident that people are going to be able to handle the vaccine and keep it within this tight temperature control so that the virus is in fact effective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am reassured by the fact that the first as we are recording this talk, the first American was vaccinated, right? And that comes very shortly after the FDA said, you guys can begin shipping this thing around the country, right? So to me, one of the amazing things that we frankly need to give credit to the government for, and certainly the drug companies, is the logistics, frankly, the support services processes that have backed this whole thing, certainly since last week, and obviously in the months of preparation ahead of time. So, and then to be specific, there's a reason why the vaccine is only going to 10 or 11 or 12 places on day one, right? And more places than that on day 2 and day 5 and whatever else. And that's because those places have proven to the government, to vaccine manufacturers, that they can do what's required, right? They have the cold storage necessary, and they have designed a process to keep it safe and to do it appropriately, right? The vaccine isn't just getting shipped willy-nilly everywhere. It's only getting sent to the sort of hub places that have proven that they can keep it as cold as necessary. So I'm reassured by, frankly, the proof in the pudding at this point on the logistics side and the shipping side.
And this and some of these containers that they're shipping all these vaccines, they have temperature monitors, they're sealed. I mean, the amount of infrastructure around it to be able to safely and effectively sort of deliver from point A to point B in that environment is pretty impressive. I mean, if you look at some of the pictures out there and whatever they put out, it's pretty impressive, the level of sophistication around the containers to be able to ensure that constant temperature.
As you all said before, this has been a rapid turnaround. What about long term? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road? I think several of us have seen the movie with Will Smith, where he thought he was creating a cure for cancer and turned out to give everybody rabies. Do we have any long-term concern about vaccines causing, I don't know, heart disease or cancer or whatever it could be?
So the direct answer to the question is There's absolutely no way to say that for sure, right? Let's be transparent, right? I mean, we have had these vaccines in studies since July, right? And it is now November, early December, right? So we can't say this with 100% certainty. What we can say is that we know how these things work. We know they aren't persistent, right? I mean, basically the vaccine comes in with these little liposomes. It stimulates your endogenous system to make a protein for a short period of time and it's gone. So is it remotely possible? Yeah, that's probably true. The analogy I go back to, and I hope Olson's watching this, because there was a crash review board, right? That long time ago, when I was the director, there was an ambulance that crashed in the snow, and a member of that crash review board said it's a preventable accident. And we said, well, how is it preventable? He said, well, you just didn't have to go. Well, okay, yes, we can assure that there's no complication from anything if we do nothing. So, but I think we've got to go, right? And so we've got to take the best data that we have, which says this thing does not persist. We know how it works. It's been around for a long time. And can we say with 100% certainty? No, but we can't say with a 100% certainty a lot of things.
Okay, so again, staying along the safety argument discussion, we know that shortly after Pfizer began administering their vaccine, there were several people who had some allergic reaction. And we also know from AstraZeneca that there was a dosing error or problem back in November where several of the participants actually got lower dose of vaccine than what they were supposed to get. You know, again, I go back to how confident are you that these vaccines are safe and are going to do what everyone says they're going to?
So I'll take that one just to start off. I mean, I think that what reassures me is the massive number of people that have been studied in both trials, right? And I think that overwhelmingly, those trials have suggested that the vast majority of people are going to be safe when they get the vaccine. Now, certainly, as I mentioned in my portion before, you know, bad stuff happens to people whether or not you get the vaccine. And it's certainly also true that there are single numbers of things that have happened to vaccine participants that are probably vaccine unrelated, right? Whether that's a hypersensitivity reaction, a handful of people in both arms actually, you know, had various and sundry adverse events. And, you know, whether or not you can attribute those to the vaccine or not, sometimes an extraordinarily small number, extraordinarily small population is unknown. But the dramatic great majority of people who had these vaccines had an appropriate, safe response, right? So is that to say that the next person who gets it, you know, won't have an extraordinarily rare complication that's possibly attributed to the vaccine? No, I mean, yes, just like Brent said, you know, something like that can happen, but the numbers suggest that the chance of that happening is extraordinarily small.
The other thing, Don, that gives me reassurance is, yes, you mentioned AstraZeneca. Where are they? They are not submitting an EUA, right? So the EUA process is incredibly robust and incredibly thorough. And so people that have made errors in their studies or have some better data they need to do or reanalysis, they are not submitting an EUA. So if you've got an EUA, that gives me a great deal of confidence compared to those that are in, you know, pre-EUA stages.
And finally, my last question, and while this has not come up as much as it did historically, I do want to give everyone a chance to sort of answer the question. Vaccines do not cause autism. Is that a true statement?
That is a true statement.
That is a
Yes.
true statement, yes.
That is a true statement. And by the way, neither do power lines cause leukemia, just so while we're there.
All right. Excellent. Well, that's all the questions I have. Quickly, we'll go around the horn. Dr. Myers, you're getting the vaccine. There's no doubt in your mind, and you recommend it for everybody.
Absolutely, 100%.
And Dr. Williams, same question to you. You're rolling up your sleeve. You're getting the vaccine, no doubt in your mind.
Absolutely. There's a race to compete to who can get it to me first, either the county or the hospital.
And Dr. Cabanas, you're getting yours as well, I take it?
Yes, sir. Right here.
All right. Dr. Cabanas, I'll give you the last word for today.
No, thanks so much, everybody, for being here today. Thanks, Brent and Jeff and Don. Thanks for putting this together and getting us all in the round table. Again, we are in the critical stages of our pandemic response in our country, in our community. And again, like I said in my opening, I cannot thank all of you for all your hard work, dedication, everything you are doing to serve our community, and especially your patience of being flexible and adapting as we have made changes since March the 3rd when we had our first case, adapting to our PPE, adapting to our response. Everything you are doing has been incredibly valuable to make sure our community is safe. So now at a critical stage of the pandemic response, it is critical now that we all participate in this vaccination process so we can make a big turn on the corner, prevent additional growth in our curve for deaths and more cases. So again, I really encourage all of you to take vaccination. If you have any questions, concerns, things that come up, please feel free to reach out to any of us because we want to make sure that we're giving you all the information you need to make your personal decision.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today and answer all of our questions and give us, again, the straight, honest, backed, researched information about all these vaccines. Again, as Dr. Cabanas said, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. If we get enough questions, we may decide to do another one of these videos if we need to. Thank you for tuning in, and please be safe out there.